So, Alex, we're having conversational counseling conversations. Wow, that's maybe I should have just said counseling conversations with dear saints who have suffered well, and in doing so have been used by God to help others, and we know are going to help our listeners as well. And so it's my delight to introduce Carol Collier to our audience today. Our church worlds crossed for a short season, but Carol's one of those people that just really made a lasting impression on me. And Carol is no stranger to suffering. In fact, when I met her, she was in the middle of part of her suffering story, and I think that's what actually drew me to her in such a unique way, was knowing that and seeing how she was walking with Jesus and how he was carrying her. And Carol has described herself as a student of Lament, and says that Lament is one of her life's companions. And so with that in mind, Carol, we just want to welcome you to Conversational Counseling and want to thank you for being willing to come on today. And we're going to let you share your story, and then we want to have some conversations about Lament and what you've learned and what it is and how it's impacted you and how it can help our listeners as well. So thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me into this very special space. I'm glad to be here and to be able to share what God has been for me in a very difficult journey. And so it is a privilege to be here. And thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, we thought we would just start off with you sharing about your suffering story to give our listeners an opportunity just to know, what is it that has brought you into this realization of the importance of lament that has been so life-changing for you, because it's not where we want to go oftentimes, but it is where God leads us in his faithfulness.
Well, as my husband and I were approaching our 60th birthday, and also celebrating 40 years of marriage, there was a real sense that both of us had that we were about to come into our glory years, that everything that had been a part of our life for 40 years of marriage was, and ministry. Scott and I were ministry people, and even though we both had full-time jobs that were not in ministry, we didn't have hobbies. We did ministry together. And so there was so much that those 40 years together held, and we felt like we were really coming into what we called our glory years, that we were going to be able to spend time together in ways that we hadn't, because we had been so busy with life, raising children, other people's children, all of that. And so we were, our children had a 40 anniversary, 60th birthday little dinner for us, and it was just this time where they were blessing us, and it's just imprinted in my mind, like I can just experience that evening all over again. And that was towards the end of 2014. And then January 2015, here we are, we're so excited, and Scott lost his job. And it was a shock. He'd been in the industry for 30 years, and it was one of those where, you take a 60-year-old man and he is no longer as viable in the corporate world, and so he was really displaced. And it was just such a shock, and it was really, for him, a very traumatic experience. And so that was January 2015, and by the end of 2016, really the fall of 2016, he began to experience some symptoms that led to him being seen by a neurologist, and at the end of 2016 he was diagnosed with ALS. And so the loss of the job really was an anchor that was pulled up in our lives, that a very, very important anchor, that of stability, financial stability, and it never went back down. That I think that there's just those things in life that are not, there is no closure, there is no resolve. And so, and then we're thrust into a health crisis that with ALS, there is one trajectory and one only, and it's towards death. there's really nothing to be done, and you just manage the decrease of mobility, the decrease of everything. So that just, again, turned our worlds upside down, and we needed to move. We needed to find a home that would accommodate Scott as he declined. And so those years from really 2015 until his death, the end of 2019, were just this constant movement under my feet. And I often described it as I was thrown into an angry sea, and I couldn't see where I was. I'd lost my navigational tools. There was no land in sight, and nothing. Everything just kept moving and shaking. And so, of course, end of 2019, he passes away, and then we go into COVID. And so that year was isolating for me. And here I am in a brand new life, and the world stops. And then the end of it was August 2022, our daughter Suzanne, 35 years old, perfectly healthy and robust, got COVID, and she died. And it was just, again, I remember standing at her bedside and thinking, Lord, how can I be standing at the bedside of another person who is struggling to breathe and dying? And so it was just, again, my world just rocking. And so it just seemed like for so many years, nothing stopped moving, and it was all just one hit after another. And so here I am, 2023, and the Lord has brought me to a place where the grief is not so loud. It's a little more calm and quiet, and I'm able to begin to see where my feet are. And so so it's been really the decade of my 60s. I'm 68. I look at it and sometimes I go, well, that was a bust, and it certainly didn't go the way that I thought. The glory years that I envisioned never did happen. And so having to learn, what does that mean? What was I hearing from the Lord when I thought I was hearing that I was coming into my glory years? And bringing that question to him, like, what is it then, if this isn't what I thought it was going to be? So I'm still journeying that. He is revealing to me and his character, and also some purposes for my life. And so I'm very thankful to be in this broader space rather than in the narrow space of very acute grief.
Carol, Ed Welch says that sometimes when we sit with another person in their story, we feel like we need to take off our shoes because we're on holy ground.
Holy ground, yes.
It is holy ground to hear your story and to sit in that much grief coming so fast. The waves is the tossing sea is a great visual picture of the last 8 years. And I just appreciate the willingness to bring that, the depth of that grief and the depth of that disorientation, because one thing I've realized about myself over the last few years is I feel a lot of shame when I feel confused and disoriented, and I don't want to talk about it. And so I really do appreciate that it's not easy to share these places where our legs have been swiped out from under us. So thank you. And I think we're already hearing probably even some of the lines you've used in Lament, because Lament has become precious to you in this season. So would you tell us how you define Lament, and then why you think Lament is important for us as believers?
Well, I would define it as holy complaint with a direction. So it's not that that I'm just sitting in complaint with ambiguity. It has a direction, and that direction is towards a person, and that is Jesus Christ. And so even though when we read the laments and the Psalms, and 1/3 of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, and what is so remarkable to me is that This was the nation of Israel's hymn book. That was their song book. So they sang lament, and they were familiar with the language of lament. And there's one psalm, Psalm 88, that has no resolution. There is no good news at the end of it. It is dark, dark, dark. And that is, to me, an invitation that we can come without needing to have the answers. We don't have the answers. We also don't need to demand the answers. That sometimes there is no light at the end of the tunnel, but a lament is it begins in faith, it remains in faith, and it continues in faith. And even when there seems to be a lost connection between me and God, because God is not an instantaneous gratifier. He is not. He waits in silence, sometimes silence on his end. And that's very important. That space of Selah, the pause, the silence, is sometimes the most important space to remain in. And so often we want to move out of it very quickly. We want to know what's the next steps, what is the plan, and when there is none, that is when we have the opportunity to really encounter God with an intimacy that is so remarkable that you cannot explain it until you have actually been there and experienced it. So lament is biblical. It is, we find it in the Psalms, of course, Lamentations. We find it really in Romans, the groaning that the earth is groaning, we are groaning. Lament is all through the scriptures. And so it is the path that God has given for the faithful in their times of great distress. So that's how I would define it.
Yeah. Gosh, all that is so good. I was never taking notes, thinking, "Oh, gotta remember that. Gotta remember that." I've heard you say that we're accustomed to expressing our faith in joyful praises, but I love when you say, "But God has opened up a place for us to bring all the sad and hard emotions." And I think a lot of times for Christians that feels very unspiritual, very faithless instead of faith-filled. And so I love your definition, a holy complaint with a direction toward Jesus. And then this idea of just Selah. I mean, I read the Psalm so often, I go, Selah, let's read the next Psalm. Right? Like there's no pause, there's no stop. It's just like, okay, well, that's just a word and let's move on. And so I think that's just a really good reminder that there's a reason why God asks us to pause, to rest. Alex and I talk a lot about rest, about pausing, about waiting on the Lord, because we tend to be such doers and moving forward, frantically and quickly as we go. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Carol, that so often we don't connect lament with being an act of faith, because the words that we're saying often don't sound faith-filled. They sound really, I mean, if we're lamenting right, it's going to sound harsh and raw and very unspiritual. But I love the idea that we have these very unspiritual sounding words, but because of the direction that they're moving, it is an act of faith, because it's moving to God and not our backs turned away from him, but towards him. It's an act of faith.
Yes. Yeah, I've thought about that, and there was a point, more than one point. There was not just one point, but where I was exhausted, I was frustrated. There was just a flood of emotions, and I had had a few hours to myself. I had a caregiver who was with Scott so that I could get out, and I was meeting someone for lunch, and it was pouring down rain, and I couldn't find a parking space, and I was very frustrated, really very fragile. And I got out of the car, and you couldn't help but be drenched. And I stood on a downtown street and yelled at God. I was so angry. And soon afterwards, I said, Lord, I'm done. I'm done. I'm letting go. If I fall, I fall. If I fail, I fail. I really don't even care anymore. And it was not cognitively a moment of surrender, but it was a surrender of my soul, that I was letting go. And what I saw in that, now that I can look back, is that that really required a deep assurance that God is who he says he is. That I am so safe with him, I am so loved by him, that if I let go, I will be caught. And I was caught by the everlasting arms of steadfast love. I didn't feel it necessarily in that moment, but I think my soul knew it. And I realized too that my grip is not the point. You know, it's not my grip on him, it's his grip on me. And so in that, what happened in the depths of my being was that I have an assurance that God is who he says he is, and that his love, his perfect divine love, is so much greater than I could imagine, that it has nothing to do with my ability to earn it or to keep it. It's so secure in the work and life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ that I have nothing to fear. So that was what happened in that moment, even though cognitively I could not have given you the theology for that, you know, but it has given me a deep assurance that I didn't have before. And it is, I had said this to Brenda a little earlier, I'm not unshakable. If I get a phone call today that something tragic has happened, I will be shaken. Jesus is unshakable. And that is why this holy complaint needs to have a direction. Otherwise, we are really, really despairing. And so it is remarkable what God is doing in those depths, even when we can't feel it, or even when we cannot give a theological explanation in the moment. But something is happening, and it's deeply transforming.
Yes. Yes, I like to say that comfort transforms us in a way that conviction and encouragement don't. Like you said, there's an experiential knowledge of God when you're crying out. Like, you don't understand what's happening, but God is, through the Holy Spirit, in your inner being, convincing you of his love for you. And that's just supernatural. That is just something we can't explain. So, Carol, one of the things that I love that you say is that lament should be a spiritual discipline, not just something we learn to get ready for, you know, the bad times. Can you explain what you mean by that? Why you think it's should be a spiritual discipline we practice?
Well, I think that if we will allow ourselves to really look at the grand narrative of creation, fall, redemption, restoration, then we will see that we have a more realistic view of God's world. We will know, where are we? Where are we in this crazy, very chaotic world? Well, we're very much living in the brokenness of sin and evil, both in the world and in ourselves. And so we have a lot to groan about. There is a lot. We don't like to groan. We don't like to be reminded of what is broken. And so the reality is, and we know this from, Romans, is that the whole earth is groaning and we groan. And so lament should not be a stranger to us. It should be something that we actually purposefully and intentionally enter into. That when we observe what is happening in this world, rather than try to explain it, and I think that there's a propensity in all people. I see it a lot in Christianity because that's my world, is we want to be able to understand and explain things. We want to be able to give reason for why these things are happening. And, that's not always possible. So let's learn to groan. Let's make friends with our groaning, because in the groaning is where we find God's not his purposes always, although we know the great purpose of restoration, but we enter into the reality of God's timeline for us. We are not yet in restoration. We are still living very much in the brokenness, and thank God there is daily redemption and restoration, just not in the ultimate sense. So I think that it's when we enter into lament intentionally, we are agreeing with God that things are really, really messed up, and people are really hurting, and we're really hurting. The world is hurting, and so I think it really is coming into agreement with Him. So I think that that's one reason why practicing lament, not just waiting for the just in case it happens or it has happened, but actually preparing, because it will happen and is happening. But I also, and this is something I've been thinking about lately, because I'm sitting with a woman right now who's going through a lot of upheaval in her life and turmoil, and one of her complaints is that, the church doesn't seem to know what to do with it, and people don't know what to do. And I thought, how do we, short of, creating a program for people to learn how to come alongside hurting people, what if instead we practiced lament, that we got very comfortable with sitting in those spaces, that we ourselves knew what it was like to lament. And I really wonder if that's not a direction for the church, is that we actually begin to make it a spiritual practice, so that when people are hurting, we don't plug them into a program, we don't necessarily send them to a counselor, but that we are able to be with them in their sorrow, in their lament, in their brokenness, and we're accustomed to it. This is a place that we have traveled ourselves. So I think it's a really important spiritual discipline that I would like to see move to the forefront, especially coming out of such a mournful, sorrowful time of COVID, all kinds of upheaval in our society, our culture, our world. So those are some directions I've been thinking about as to the importance of lament as a spiritual practice.
Yeah. I love the idea that lament is agreeing with God. Because I think so many times we think we're saying something we're not supposed to, and that the reality is we're saying what's true. We're saying the lament, to me, is we're saying the truth of, God, this is not how you made it to be.
Right.
And this is my reality, and this is not what you intended this to be. We weren't made for this death, this decay, this sin, this pain. And so I love that idea of we're agreeing with Him. We're coming to His side, and we're saying what He would say about it. And I really love the idea that lament as a practice enables us to sit with people who are suffering. We won't go to those places with someone else if we won't go there first alone with God. We'll resist it. And I think we've all had experiences with people who, when we tell them maybe even just a small part of our suffering story, we feel them resist. We feel them try to redirect us to put the red bow on and tie it up and make it look really pretty. And it leaves us feeling so empty and feeling so disconnected. And so I love the idea that if we put this into practice, it changes the way that we come together corporately and one-on-one. So Carol, I'm finally getting to a question. How do you put lament into your daily life, your spiritual disciplines? What does that look like for you in a practical way?
I do, and it's kind of like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Yeah. I have a lot of people who come to me with the hard things of their life, and sometimes when they're at a crisis point. And so I think that there is, because I have practiced lament, because I do, there is a knowledge that I can hold their stories, that I'm able to sit with them in that space and allow God to enter in with us and minister. So, you know, I know that because I've been very open and invitational about my sorrows and my grief, I've really wanted to spread a table and invite people to come in and to feast with the King. And so I get to enter into the practice of lament with other people. And also the Psalms, you know, a third of the Psalms being laments, and they are so rich and so, they're beautiful. And when I really think that intentionally reading a psalm of lament and letting yourself sit in it, maybe a Lectio Divina practice, and allowing yourself to feel the feelings that you have as you read it, and not correcting whatever rises up, whether it would be anger, sadness, fear, but naming it with God and allowing Him to meet you in that space and to minister to you, me, what He has for me that is just so intimate and so kind. So, and then as we observe the world around us, there you can either choose to block it out, or you can choose to enter in to the sorrows of this world. And so it can be as close as a person who knocks on my door, who is in a moment of crisis, and it can be as distant as maybe something that I read in the news, something that I'm hearing happening, is to, instead of entering into that with, you know, a quick wanting to have an answer as to why this is happening and how we need to get this, you know, under control or fixed, that we actually allow ourselves to feel what is happening. And so whether it would be, you know, as something as horrific as a school shooting, to really allow ourselves to feel the grief of that, or something that is happening in Ukraine, you know, that we are so quick to move on to the next thing, and so quick to comfort ourselves with really worthless idols, when if we sit in the pain, we will find this voice of God that is so beautiful, so nourishing, so nurturing. And so, you know, I think we just need to walk into it instead of walking away from it, and making it a practice. You know, it doesn't have to be daily, but maybe part of our spiritual rhythms, you know, like we do Lent, you know, maybe practicing 40 days of lament, where we actually allow ourselves to go into the place of sackcloth and ashes. And I know it's very un-American, and it can also be very antithetical to some of the evangelical Christian messages that we can sometimes get, is that we are victorious and we are overcomers. There is truth to that, but there's another part of the story, is that we are here now but not yet. We are living in the kingdom but not yet. And that needs to be a place of mourning for us. And we don't like it, we won't do it. So then when somebody comes who is really in a place of pain, we don't know what to do, because we've never allowed ourselves to be in that place.
Yeah. And really practically, Carol, one of the things that has changed this into a regular practice for me, I always used to say that journaling was always my New Year's resolution, and I never kept it, ever, until the last probably 6 months. And two things changed that, particularly journaling lament. And I no longer pick up my pretty journal. I pick up a blank sheet of paper. And when I write, it is messy. You really wouldn't even be able to read it. It is almost a stream of consciousness. It is messy words, messy emotions, and they're all on paper. And the second thing is that when I'm done, I burn it. And my family laughs at me, but it has become a ritual for me because I stand at my kitchen sink and I light it on fire. And there is a sense that only it goes up to God and only He sees those words. And that He is so much kinder to that messiness than I can even be to that messiness. Like, He is the only one who can hold it. I can't hold my own words. And those two things have revolutionized this as a spiritual discipline for me. It's like I finally get why people feel like it's cathartic, because I'm not worried that anybody else is going to see it, and it doesn't have to look pretty.
Yeah, I have stacks of journals, and there's, the ones from this decade of my life, I say I'm going to wrap in yellow caution tape and read at your own risk, because they're not, I really think that if we're honest, faith is messy. It is not linear. And being able to be with someone in their messy faith, that, this woman that I'm sitting with right now, she just wants to know, am I loved in my pain and my disorder? Can I be ugly and still be loved? And I think that when we have allowed ourselves to see the ugly parts of ourselves, the shadow parts, the parts that are not lovely and presentable, and we find that we have a loving Savior who sits there with us, that's how we can be for other people. So it's incarnational, is that we, come into the lives of people and we are able to sit with them, because we have learned or are learning our own shadow side, and what is it like to sit with a loving Savior. And so I think, it's just a messy faith is, I think, something I want to call people into. It's like I just recently taught, I'm finishing up this week, we've been doing a book in a summer book study, Surrender to Love by David Benner. And last week I said in my teaching is that when we come into intimacy with God, we take off the clothes of performance, we wash our happy, shiny Christian face off, we empty our bag of worthless trophies, we brush our teeth and rinse our breath of our self-justification, blame-shifting, self-righteousness. We set aside our iPhone of likes, and we sit naked with God. And if you stand in front of the mirror and you see your naked body, we tend to want to, even if it's just us, we want to cover up. There's shame, which points us back to what happened in the garden when the first emotion that Adam and Eve felt was shame, and they were hiding from God, and God called them out, and He removed their false covering and gave them a covering that pointed to the future, covering of Jesus. But that place of being naked and unashamed with God is really a place of deep intimacy that's really, it doesn't transcend the cognitive, but it, in one sense, bypasses and goes to the deeper regions. And I don't think that intimacy with God can be found just by thinking right thoughts. I think it has to drop down into the emotional and the desire part of our being, and that's where we will find the messiness, and that is right where God is waiting to see us, receive us, and speak to us and hold us.
Yeah. Oh gosh, Carol, this is just so beautiful. So many great takeaways. I almost just feel like we just need to be like, we need to say Selah. We almost need to be quiet for a few minutes and just
Pause.
take in what all pause to all that's been said is just so powerful and so good. I know that you are a prolific writer, and I've read some of your work on your social media, and just so beautiful. And we wondered maybe if you would share one of your laments with us and with our listeners today, that we could just be blessed by hearing something that the Lord has shown you along the way and how He's met you.
Okay. Well, this is a prayer that I wrote just a few days, maybe a week after Scott died. And so I'll read that. O Lord, assist me as I place my foot upon this untamed path. Let me not push and rush and wildly enter such holy ground. May every necessary tear water the ground under my feet, and every breathed out sigh open the air before me. Lift my head just enough to notice what surrounds me, but bowed without break to carry the weight of a great loss. May my tears soften and prism this new landscape of wild and sharp edges. Grace me to make peace with the quiet and stillness of this space that was once filled with the life and spirit of my love. My trust is in you, Lord Jesus. I place my hand in yours. And I have one more, if you're okay, for me to read.
Please do.
This one is more of a lament. This one was soon after he died as well. In the quiet of the almost spent day, my thoughts slowly turn. This way, that way. Could there have been a different way, Lord? Why this way, Lord? I answer to myself, I don't know why this way. Selah. In this moment, Lord, I surrender my search to know, to understand, to make sense. I surrender not in defeat. I surrender in relief. I sigh and release for now the unfathomable why. I release and fall into the unfathomable you.
Those are so beautiful. Oh my goodness. And one of the things that's so beautiful about the Psalms, or having somebody like you who God has clearly given a gift for words and expressing emotions. We might not take Alex's laments that she burns and use them as our, as a model, because they're not going to be available. She's burned them to the Lord.
They're not that beautiful, I can tell
you. Well, the messiness of, to know, I guess we've given people permission to have that real messy sense of where they can just go and word vomit, and then it's just, they can get rid of it. But I think also to have the Psalms, or to have people like you who can put into words sometimes what others cannot put into words. And so I think that's so beautiful, and I'm thankful that you often so freely share those thoughts, and even, as you lament for other people, as you've shared that as well. I think just encourages the rest of us to enter into a discipline, the spiritual discipline of lament, but also gives us some words, some vocabulary, some language for what that might look like to have complaints that are Godward. As well. So thank you. I don't know, Alex, is there anything else you wanted to ask or say before we wrap up? Or Carol, is there anything you want to say as a wrap up?
Well, Alex, I didn't want to just jump in.
I just still am captured by the idea that, we talk so much about how to walk alongside others, and I'm just really grateful, Carol, that you've brought lament as it is our means of entering into the comfort and care of God, but it also is the means to bring comfort and care to others. And it may sound weird, but I don't think I've made that connection before. I think that's just been really profound for me to sit here and think that it's true that the messier that I allow myself to get in my vertical relationship it's just the more comfortable I am sitting with others in their messy places. And so I just thank you for making that connection today.
Yeah. Well, I think how in the years of Scott's dying, they were really hard because, well, of course they were, but there was, I think one of the hardest things for me was encountering what I call that shadow self, that self that had never, I mean, of course it was there, but had never had to, or it was never brought to life in the way that it was when I was caring for him. And one of the hard things for me during and after was the remembering my times of impatience, unkindness, being distant from him, frustrated, and not loving. And I sought the Lord on that, and because it was so, it would really burden me, especially afterwards, because I couldn't go back and make repair. And I'm very careful not to attribute words to the Lord, but yet I know there are times when his Spirit speaks to mine. And I asked him, I said, Lord, why? Why did you let, I would ask you for more patience. I would ask you. And was it just the quality of my request, or was it you who didn't come through for me? And what I felt in my spirit was that he said, I ordained your failures. And there were times where I did pull back. And that was because you needed to see who you really are. Because only in seeing who you really are you going to be able to see who I really am. And it was painful. And it still is, if I remember, the times of me being impatient with Scott and not being the person that I thought I could be and that I thought I was. And God is saying, no, you need to see. You need to see, because this is where you will be able to see who I really am. And so that has given me great comfort to know that he even ordains my failures. But it's not just so that I can be left desolate. It is so that I can receive the consolation of who he is. And what a love, I don't even know that there are human words to describe the love of Christ for us. It's just beyond, words. And so that is something I think that has enabled me to sit with people when they're finding their shadow side, where they're like, I can't believe that this is how I'm feeling. And for me to be able to say, what is it you are feeling? You can say it. It's safe, because we have a safe God. We do. He is wild. He is not, but he is safe. And so that was something that has really, I think, deeply changed me, as seeing that I was not the shiny, happy Christian in this. I was really ugly at times. And that even in that, God was catching me in that moment and covering with grace. So that has allowed me to sit with people in their messiness and sometimes their ugliness, and not to judge, because I saw it in myself. And I received so great a love. And that's what I want them. That's the feast, is this great love of our King, who loves us so much that he will seek us out no matter how far we go. So it's just that blessed assurance. It really is. And it is so deeply rooted in who Christ is for me.
Well, I think we're going to stop there, because that's enough to keep us all meditating, pondering, thinking, giving thanks, lamenting, all of it for a while. Carol, thank you so much. It has just been such a joy. I just can't even tell you. I think Alex and I are going to be chewing on what you've said for a long time. And, I'm just thinking, here you are in Chattanooga with me. I need to get together with you more often to receive more encouragement and wisdom and insight and all of that. But we really, from the bottom of our hearts, we're so sorry for the pain you've been through, but we're so thankful that you have struggled and suffered well, and that God has brought you now into a season that you are offering so much hope to so many people, and allowing them to see and know and understand the love of God for them in their suffering. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a really sweet time together. Thank you.